We're
Hi.
live. Hi, friends. Welcome to another meeting of the Annotation Station. Yeah. Book club.
Yes,
Which, if you'd like full access to, consider becoming a channel member at any level to get access to the Discord. If you want to talk deeper with us and have monthly chats and other shenanigans. Otherwise, we stream these every month, our full
yes.
discussions. My co host here is Natalie.
Hello.
She's linked below. If you're not following her, correct that mistake right now because she's amazing. Yes. I am being passive aggressive. Follow my friend. She's great. We're here. We're tired. We're queer. I don't know. I'm
And
so
okay, you should also follow me because that's where we discuss our fiction book club picks. We
yes.
do
That's
nonfiction on Steph's channel, and we do fiction on my channel. So
yes. See, look at that teamwork.
it
I
makes the
love
dream.
giving a rationale instead of just being aggressive. that's how
I'm
I
like,
show
let's
up.
back our arguments with evidence.
Yes. I argue she brings evidence. Anywho, this is the September book club nonfiction read. So the Annotation Station is a book club that we started earlier this year, and the goal is to read 2 books every month, 1 fiction and 1 nonfiction, with the goal of reading diversely and staying informed. I love my little catchphrase that I came up with. Hi, Damien. So in September, we read A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott, who is an indigenous American author. And so we're going to be going full thoughts on that. Yeah. Should I start off by explaining what we're going to read next month in case anyone doesn't stay for the full video and is thinking about joining us in the future?
Sure.
Okay. I will share screen. So next month, or this month actually, for October, we are reading To Save and to Destroy, Writing as an Other by Viet Thanh Nguyen. Forgive me if I'm not saying that name correctly. I will learn how to say it. But it says, born in a war-ravaged Vietnam, Viet Nguyen arrived in the United States as a child refugee in 1975. The Nguyen family would soon move to San Jose, California, where the author grew up, attending UC Berkeley in the aftermath of the shocking murder of Vincent Chin, who shaped the political sensibilities of a new generation of Asian Americans. The essays here, delivered originally as the prestigious Norton Lectures, proffer a new answer to the classic literary "What does the outsider mean to literary writing?" Over the course of 6 captivating and moving chapters, Nguyen explores the idea of being an outsider through lenses that are, by turns, literary, historical, political, and familiar. I will not read the rest, but it sounds very timely. So I'm excited to talk about that. Okay. As we usually do, should we start off with ratings?
We can, even though I'm almost always on the page of it's nonfiction. I don't give it a rating personally. So yeah, but in general feelings, I feel very middle of the road with it. Some good things, some not so good things,
Valid. I actually have to look it up real quick because I forgot what I rated it. I give it a 3.
What I can also say is that, well, I actually read the entire thing, which speaks to the readability of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't always make it through our nonfiction because I'm not really a nonfiction girly. I'm here, in a costume, masquerading.
I gave it a 3, also very middle of the road. I have positives and I have constructive criticism. So we will be getting to both of those things. Should we kind of give like a brief overview of what the goal of this book was?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Do you want to try, or should I?
No, ma'am.
Me trying to like pass the ball? No, okay.
I refuse this energy.
That's fair. As you can see, both of our sub names are tired, sleep and tired. Okay, because we were hardworking teachers, and right after this, we're gonna go do lesson plans and paperwork. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Point is, with my 2 brain cells, this book was about make some fire. this book was a series of essays from Alicia Elliott, who is half indigenous, half white, because she talks about her relationship with her parents growing up on a reservation. I want to say, I feel like she's a little bit older than me, so it's got to be the time frame of her childhood and what she was talking about from her childhood to her late 20s. So that I feel like that had to be like late 1980s to 1990s and like early 2000s. She talks about her experience growing up in a very poor family, growing up trying to avoid child care services because of the very sad, unfortunate situations that her family ended up in due to poverty, due to her mother's mental health. Her mother, we learn, has, I believe, bipolar disorder and maybe something else, but I can't remember what exactly.
I think the one that was most consistently mentioned was bipolar.
Yeah. And so her mother being in and out of mental institutions, and then also having, how many siblings? 6?
Something like that.
Yeah. So basically dealing with that as a child and her getting pregnant at an early age. She had a teen pregnancy. She is, as far as we know, still with her partner, who was the person who she ended up marrying and from having the baby with. And as far as we know, they're happily married right now. So it's kind of like her life over the past 30 years. And what that means for her in a series of essays about different topics that relate to her identity. So that's essentially what it's about. Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I would say those are the big things. Like the title, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, is because a central topic of this nonfiction book is mental health in general, both her own, that of her parents, and what is, transmitted through generations.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a pretty big emphasis, but she does branch out beyond just that.
So, yeah. So I think from there, we can start diving into different things. So maybe I feel like the thing that's sticking to the front of my mind right now and wanting to talk about is like the word that's coming to my mind is invisibility. In a couple different ways. One is that, so Alicia talks about trying to hide so much of what was happening in her house from the outside world, from school, because one school is going to call child protective services. As a child, she wants to fit in. When she met her partner, when they were dating, she wanted them to like her. And so hiding her home situation, her poverty, from the outside world in order just to have some semblance of normalcy. But what she was going through shouldn't be normal. And it's like, I saw it as she's trying to be invisible from these systems that are in place that are supposed to protect children. But these systems are products of larger systems that put her family in this place in the first place.
Yeah. No, that's one of the big things of this book, is talking about how, in theory, we think of child protective services as well as the name mentions, like it's supposed to be a service provided to the community to help children, to protect children from harm. But then when you look at statistically what the results are, like the future outcomes are for kids who do end up in the custody of CPS, it's all very negative results.
Mm-hmm.
Like the chances of actually thriving after being in that system are very slim, which is part of what she ends up talking about. Like ultimately, it's actually better. There are higher chances of success if you are raised in poverty with your family than being taken from your family and put in the system.
Yeah.
Even though there's still going to be shit, like you're still going to have trauma from that experience. Both experiences are traumatic in their own ways, in essence. But what has been shown throughout the years is that it's better to go through the experience with your family with some level of support than in the system that doesn't provide, frankly, the love and care that a parent, even if flawed, will try in most cases to provide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And that's not to say that every family is the better option. Like there's plenty of families who, do not have the love or care that they are supposed to provide to their children. There are many families who are a detriment to their children, but I think that what these systems do is it's under this idea that if you provide a child a roof, a food, and a place to sleep, that's kind of all that they need for success. And that's really not it. They need care, they need love, they need guidance, they need community. Humans are community-centered creatures. And so that's why the statistics show that even though these children are being taken out of these situations, they're less likely to flourish as they get older from foster care, from these child protective service programs.
And on top of that, like she specifically focuses a lot on indigenous children
Mm-hmm.
and how often CPS is more likely to target indigenous families based on this history of thinking, no, we can do better. We can, in essence, teach out the indigenousness out of a child, and that will lead them to have a better life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's hypervigilance of these communities, which is part of what ultimately is actually detrimental to them if they do in fact get pulled from their families' homes, because it's not healthy to be taken out of your culture, your community, what you know and love,
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely. And I think that can be said for a lot of minority cultures, even though that this focuses on indigenous families. The same can be said about Black communities, Hispanic communities, most minority cultures in the United States and in Canada. Specifically, I think Alicia is focusing, she's in Canada, I think, if I remember correctly.
I think there's talks a little bit about both Canada and the US, because I do think there was a point in time where she was living in the US.
Okay.
There was some movement in her life of where she was living.
But yeah, these are forms of systemic oppression that are under. It's not to say that everyone who works in them is malicious. It's not like it necessarily was during the founding of residential schools, but that these systems that were founded in this false ideology and that promotes oppression, that doesn't go away. It's still very much baked into the system. So she talks a lot about that. She talks about how poverty really affected her family and how it's like no matter what they did, they couldn't. The whole ideology of picking yourself up by the bootstraps, which very much her father and mom tried to do when she could, wasn't working. And that's because it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So she very much illustrated that.
Yeah.
What else did she talk about? I gotta go back to my notes.
I feel like, okay, part of what I want to talk about is like a lot of what she's trying to contend with is the conflict of, I have both positive and negative feelings about my childhood, because growing up in poverty and growing up with a mother not taking proper care of her mental health, and on top of that, with a father oftentimes taking advantage of that, leads to a very complicated family dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so a lot of what she's trying to navigate is, in essence, like, how much of what my parents did is forgivable. I should forgive and just try to heal the relationship, and how much of it is something that I need to actually face, that it was wrong, it never should have happened. Um, and what repercussions is it having on my life? What repercussions might it have in the lives of my children? Um, and so that's, I think, one of the big things that can be difficult to read, because oftentimes, frankly, I was pissed off with both her parents for
Mm-hmm.
different reasons, you know? Um, and her parents are the way they are because of what it means to live life, in the case of her father, as an indigenous man, um, dealing with the consequences, frankly, of that. Um, and then with her mom as someone with significant mental health needs, uh, who still is trying to succeed, trying to do what's best for her family, but not fully knowing how to make
Mm-hmm.
it happen. Um, and then the only solution being provided was her husband, so Alicia's dad, just when basically he was sick and tired of her uh, institutionalizing her against her will.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I'm pretty sure that was part of why they ended up crossing into the US sometimes, because in the US, you can do institutionalization without the consent of the person, versus in Canada, you cannot,
Yeah.
or at least during the time that this was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
don't know if that's necessarily still the case now or how
yeah,
that works, but essentially that's what was happening in her family.
yeah,
Yeah, I think we have a lot to unpack there because throughout this entire thing, it felt to me like Alicia was working through her own feelings about her family as she was writing this. And so I kind of felt different sections were her very being very raw and honest about her memories of her family and what they did, how that impacted her, what she wants to carry over into her now child's life, and what she doesn't want to carry over. Versus other times where I felt like she was working through her own feelings of forgiveness for them, of maybe intentionally not wanting to talk about the way that something impacted her or unpack it fully. Um, and, that's her prerogative ultimately. I do feel as a reader that it's important for us to be able to recognize that because I think when we go into nonfiction, a lot of times it's this idea of we're going into nonfiction to learn something, and that the person who's writing has an insight as to how something is or should work. And I personally feel like the way that she wrote this, we need to be very conscious of what she's saying about forgiving her family is her own reflection of where she was mentally at the time of writing this, as to how she wants to move forward. Because ultimately, from what she told us, I feel like it's safe to say she is a child of abuse. She
yeah,
was abused. I don't know. It was mentioned, I think, briefly that there might have been some physical abuse, but she didn't talk about it very deeply. There was a lot of psychological and emotional
yeah,
abuse. And so, because of that, her choosing to forgive her parents and keep them in her life is her prerogative, but that is not the solution for everybody, nor should there be any guilt associated with not choosing to do that.
yeah, yeah. Um, and it is something that she's like in conflict with,
Mm-hmm.
and it's evident in her essays. That's like, I'm choosing this but I'm not even sure if it's the right thing necessarily. It's just what, at least at this point, is what I feel I should do. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure she does mention at one point um, groups of parents who are like, I'm estranged from my children, and they built these communities not to understand why their children um, have chosen to be distant from them, but instead to be like, my kids are wrong, our kids, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
it is a community, our kids are wrong, they never should have done this. And we're the victims in this situation. um and like the challenges of that like the space should be a space where they're trying to genuinely understand what has led to this, and not just be like, okay, now we're just in a new community where we all think our kids are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or that our kids should have just gotten over what happened during their childhood, um, whether out of an absolute denial that it happened in the first place, or like, it's done, it's over, like it's not like we can turn back time, so we need to just move on.
Yeah.
um,
Which are both forms of gaslighting manipulation. So it's interesting because when she brings that up, she brings it up as like Facebook forums and things that she's found of as far as parents who are creating those groups for themselves. And as someone who has done extensive research on this, as a person who has this processed through much therapy, being the product of narcissistic abuse, is that with those, the reason that they create those pockets of groups for themselves is because they need that external validation to then feed into this own world that they've created as a safe bubble for themselves, to protect themselves from any responsibility from what has happened. And so it's like, when you have that level of narcissism, you don't, in my experience and my research and what I've done and learned from my own help groups, is the solution is gray rocking. You don't happy love find your way into that unless everyone agrees to go to family therapy.
yeah.
The solution is family therapy or removing yourself from this abusive relationship with this person. And so at the time of Alicia writing this, it seems like she's still figuring out, how can I keep my family who has abused me and like not blame them for it, but also talk to them about those feelings. And so because of that, I hope that now, between now and the publishing of this book, that she's been able to work through feelings, done whatever she's needed to do to hopefully heal her family. But because she is in this transitional space, which is very evident from the writing, I don't think she necessarily should have included this to be a workbook of sorts at the end, where she's asking the reader, do you ever see yourself doing these things? Take a minute to reflect on how you react in these situations. Like, honey, you're still working through your own feelings. I don't think you need to be helping me work through mine.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it. I would highly recommend, I think I said this in the Discord as well, if anybody can relate to those things and actually wants a workbook by someone who has a little bit more of a professional background in these topics. There are two different doctors. One is a family therapist, a psychologist, and another one is another kind of psychologist. I would recommend, they're both workbooks, by the way. One of them is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Wonderful workbook about being able to identify what kind of abuse you experienced under your parents and how to move forward from that. And the other one is called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem. That is more specifically for Black and brown bodies who experienced, who need to reconcile with moving through abusive white spaces. So check those out. Don't, my opinion, don't follow all the questions that are in this. Actually kind of skip over the questions because I feel like this is more about her experience.
Yeah.
And not
This felt more like a memoir through essays than I don't know if the more typical, but
mm-hmm.
what I mean by that, it's like the more typical, like this is a nonfiction focused on this topic.
Yeah.
It felt more like a memoir than that other kind.
Very much.
So yeah, it didn't feel like when that came up, I was like, this feels out of place. But it also came so close to the end of it that I was like, I'm just gonna not even pay attention, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. So yeah.
I agree 100%. Oh, we have chat. Damien says, yeah, and the way she talked about abuse was just off. Like, does cutting your abuser off help them get better? Yes, when she asked that question to me, that was a red flag. Red flag of a question. I was like, I don't even think you should be asking us this question right now because you're still working through that yourself. Who cares? The goal is to keep me safe, not make them a better person, right? The goal is to heal for yourself because you cannot force someone else to heal.
Yeah, exactly. Like if there were clear signs that this person was actually trying to start a healing journey, then you could bring that up as part of the situation. Like, does it make sense to cut them off when they're actually taking the steps to address what has happened?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what's happening anyway. Like, even in her situation, that's not what's happening. And for other people, it doesn't matter. Like, if what's going to keep the victim of abuse safe is to cut off the abuser, you can love that person. That doesn't mean you have to keep them in your life.
Mm-hmm.
If it is detrimental to your quality of life, you can hope that at some point they'll realize the work they need to do to have the opportunity to heal this broken relationship, but it should not come at your dispense.
Correct. You need to find a level of distance that is going to help you heal. Because you can only be responsible for yourself and your own actions. To me, it felt like she decided to not cut off her abusive father and trying to justify this decision to the reader. I can understand why you feel that way because I can see where it felt that way in the framing of her questions and sentences.
Yeah. For me, again, I ultimately took it more as I'm not even entirely sure that she's confident in her decision. That's at least how it read to me. She's deciding to do this, but I think she's posing the questions less to the reader and more to herself. Like those I feel like are the questions that are running through her own head as she's trying to decide what to do about this relationship.
Yeah. You think it was more rhetorical?
That's how it felt to me personally, but it's like I also did not grow up in that situation, so maybe that's part of why like I can receive it that way. But that's how I read it, frankly. That it's more these are the questions basically that are keeping me up at night. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? What is the best thing to do both for myself, for my father, my family?
Yeah, I feel like I agree with both you and Damien, and the reason for that is like, to me, I also see as these are the questions that she's asking herself and how she's the guiding questions to how she's dealing with her family dynamic. But because in the very beginning, she has a note to the reader, like, write down your answers to these questions or whatever. I'm like, but this isn't for me though. You don't need to pose these questions to me. These are about you. Let's stay there. So yeah.
I think I can see that as maybe the intent of what she was trying to write, meaning confronting the actual results of what she did create. And so I tend to be more the type of reader that I focus on what did you actually create versus what did you intend to create? Because I'm like, your intentions could be to solve world hunger, but you haven't solved it. You know, what did you actually do? But that's just how I work, how I operate as a reader. I don't necessarily expect everyone else to be that way.
No, I think that's actually what this is, though. I think even though it's different, like, again, we're all interpreting what she presented to us, but I think that we're all giving evidence as to, like, to me, it's all evidence of what I'm seeing as this was a mess. It was a little bit of a mess, but that's because it was something like there's moments where she states intention, and then there's moments where it's like unclear intention. And so what she's giving us is like you said, a memoir, but then other times she's posing us questions, and it's like there's mixed messaging going on.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I mean, okay. So I think the perfect example of like the mixed intent of this book comes in when she talks about photography. Oftentimes she will talk about a subject, like she'll bring in information that's like outside of herself.
Yeah.
But then tie it to her own personal experiences. And so it creates this mix of like, are you trying to be educative in the way some nonfiction books are? Or are you just trying to be quote unquote educational in the sense of like a memoir? You can learn something from a memoir, even if its intent is more like, I'm just sharing my life. You know, this is what has happened to me, and these are the things I have learned from those experiences, because often it does come with that, with like, this is what I've learned. Maybe you can take away something from my experience. Like it's different kinds of educational approaches, I would say. And so this book often felt like it wasn't sure of what route it was trying to take. And so the photography essay felt a lot more like she was trying to be more the quote unquote typical route, again, which you read a nonfiction to learn about a certain topic. And in essence, the argument that this person is making about this topic. And it was a mess.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up too, Katie. So true, Nat. Yes. I'm actually going to read my notes that I wrote in the Discord chat on the photography thing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I don't have the brain cells, but past Steph had some brain cells. She was cooking. So I'm going to just let her speak. So she quotes Tolstoy on photography and art. I didn't write what the quote was, but I more or less elaborate on it. So I said, okay, I'm going to push back against that Tolstoy quote she referenced by saying that art can be about joy. Having the space to make for joy instead of survival is a sign of economic stability. I'm also going to push for deeper, more nuanced conversation as photographing pain. Yes, there is an exploitation in photographing pain or atrocities, which is what she tries to get to in that section by talking about the way that indigenous people were photographed. And she also references like photographs during the Vietnam War and how these photographs were used for educational purposes, but also there's a certain exploitation of taking someone's pain, which is a private thing. Even if they're doing it in public, they're not giving their consent to being examined in that way. And so there is a certain level of exploitation involved with that, is what her argument is. For example, we can look at the Nazi documentation of experiments during the Holocaust. They did not see it as exploitation, but we now know that it was. We would also argue that their exploitation made it one of the most well-documented genocides in history, which is partially why it's widely accepted to has happened as documented. Their horrible actions of documentation helped lead to prosecutions after the war. So it's like, yes, and it's a double-edged sword, and that's kind of what I wanted more from her, is to explain that there's duality to this, but she went very much in the direction of photographing someone's pain is only ever for exploitation. And I would argue that while that can be true, there are situations in which documentations of these horrible things have led us to what the evidence we needed to push forward in order to have prosecution, to validate this history, to document this history, to be able to deny people who deny themselves that this history ever happened, right? Like, we have this documentation to say you cannot deny the truth, which is why documentation, even right now, on social media is our current form of documentation of horrible things that are happening in order for us to hold others accountable. And hopefully after these horrible things come to whatever conclusion they're going to come to be able to hold those in power accountable for their actions. So I wanted a more nuanced conversation from her.
I mean, I feel like that whole essay, I just felt like its thesis was unclear. Because I felt like it started very basically photographs are evil. And
Yeah.
I was like, this is a weird argument to make. When photographs are not exclusively like of pain, of suffering, um, with the purpose of trying to other people. Like that's which she then went into or tried to go into a bit more. But again, I just felt like that essay was just a mess, frankly. It
Yeah.
was one of the worst ones because I was like, I kind of see what you're getting at, but I also feel like you could have laid this out in a much clearer way that made your ultimate message easier to digest.
Yeah. 100%. Katie says, I would say that we do exploit pain. That's true, but it also shows evidence of abuse. Sometimes they don't have the power to document abuse themselves, or they don't want it to be documented. For example, very recently, a lot listen. The truth is the truth, and I think also in times like this, people like us who are having these conversations about cultural relevancy it needs to be said is that the federal government has recently been found through social media documentation to be telling law enforcement to turn off their cameras. Why? So that there's no evidence of what they're doing to harm communities. And it's like this photographing, unfortunately, other people's pain sometimes is the only documentation we have of abuse of power.
And okay, I wanted to raise another point related to that. Like she expresses frustration of how especially in the case of the murdering of Black people, oftentimes the evidence doesn't even lead to a proper prosecution of the harm doer. And I'm like, but that's not the only purpose of documenting this. The other purpose, like, okay, we can be mad that we literally have photographic video evidence of a crime being committed and it not leading to now this man is facing life in jail. We can be mad about that, but oftentimes the other purpose of documenting that is to raise awareness of other people who do not believe that these things are happening, are unsure, are like, you're just saying things. No, look at this. We literally look at what happened. Do you not see what is going on? It is a form of conscious awareness raising in others. Like, sure, would we prefer in many cases for it to actually lead to the prosecution of the actual criminals in this situation? Yes, but that is not its only purpose, I would say.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. 100%. Documentation of joy is there no matter what, especially with modern tech. Many people have access to phones. Joy can be found in the darkest moments of anything to pro the prevailing human spirit. Lovely. Perfectly said.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yes. Also, so the way she starts off that chapter and the way she starts off a couple other chapters, I take issue with because, like I think you said before, she starts off by inserting memoir and inserting her own family experience with a topic. And then she starts going into her thoughts on that topic and pulling other documents and whatever. So in the photography section, she starts off by talking about whether it's ethical for her to take pictures of her own family without their consent. And she gives two examples. One of them, which I think is an example of her exploiting someone's pain, and that's when she was taking a picture, I think, of her sibling when they were crying for a school project. And it's like, yeah, you were a child taking a picture of another child crying and turn that in for a grade. That's a little bit exploitative.
Yeah.
But you as an adult taking candid photos of your child playing is not exploitative because you're not giving it to anybody else. It stays within the family. It's for happy reasons and positive memories. That is not the same.
Yeah. I feel like too often she was trying to make this connection between these two types of photography. I'm like, they're not the same. I'm like, they're quite literally not the same. Like, the only time they could get kind of close is, again, that specific example she gave of, like, she prioritized taking pictures for a project instead of comforting her sibling. Or little children are still able to consent. Maybe not as informed consent as when they're older, but little children are still able to consent and be like, I don't want you to take a picture of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that as a kid who grew up and didn't like pictures. And did I still end up in pictures I didn't want to be in? Yes. But you can literally have your child's consent to have their picture taken.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as a literal infant, because a literal infant cannot communicate about those kinds of things. But once they can even just vaguely communicate, they can express whether they want you to have a phone in their face, a camera in their face, or if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we don't need to be acting as if these are the same. It's weird to me that you're trying to make these the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
Yeah. Didn't read this. It sounds like the author thinks reaches the generalizations. Yeah, there were a lot of generalizations, I would say. You know what this makes me think of? Something else I want to talk about, because I know we started off with some positives. Now we're going into some criticisms, and we got I have some back and forth things. So when she talks about her parents' relationship, I did there was a specific line where she talks about her mother being white and her father being an indigenous man, that even though her mother was white and even though her mother married her father, she said, you cannot fuck your way to tolerance. And I was like, facts, because just because her mother was white, her mother married an indigenous man and therefore had half indigenous children does not mean that she is fully tolerant of cultural differences. Doesn't mean that there is an internal racism and internal bias there. So I was happy to hear her call that out, and how there, especially when she's on the reservation, she talks about her mom being on the reservation, and her mom would probably sometimes say culturally insensitive things because she's moving into this reservation now that she has an indigenous husband, indigenous children, right?
Yeah.
But I will also say there were moments throughout the book where I saw or heard, actually, because I listened to it on audiobook, where Alicia herself, as a half white woman, would say things. And I'm like, that's a little bit, your whiteness is showing, Alicia. I think you need to be aware of that. Because there was a point where she's talking about being at a residency, a creative writing residency for indigenous authors. And that when they were promoting the program, that they chose to promote certain residents who fit the more typical indigenous aesthetic to be kind of the poster people for this program. And while I can see her feeling in some ways hey, I'm also part of this, I should also be promoted, the point of the program, and something that I think we need to actually advocate for, is oppressed voices being visible and represented. So yes, Alicia, you are also indigenous and you're also present, but you need to also be an advocate for your counterparts, So that I felt was like a moment where I was like, I see the point that you're trying to make, but it's also sounding like I'm not hearing you actively talk about how they're not represented enough and that we should be celebrating this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, okay, so I need to go back a little bit in part of what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I think one of the things she did mention as well with her mom was that she naturally had to confront the fact that as a white woman, she has, um, what's the word? Societal power, but then she felt very attacked and isolated going into a community where she is the minority
Mm-hmm.
in that community. Even though in the broader society, that community is the minority, in that space, she was the minority. And that is a difficult thing to have to face when you never have had to do that, when
Mm-hmm.
you have been the societal dominant whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did find it interesting when she brought that up. um Cycling back to your other comments, I feel like part of this is also tied because I think she technically brought up that part of, was it still in the photography essay? I don't know. That photography essay felt eternal and a mess. So I don't even remember when she brought up uh the going to that event, and then they wanted to photograph basically people who looked indigenous, and her feeling left out. And like there is something to be said about how it can feel exploitative to for a company, a university, or whatever it is, to really try to push this image of like, we are diverse here, and then you actually go there and you're like, I mean, sure, there's brown and black people here, but it's not like in the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like in the pictures. Like I can see that. I would raise that as the more important point versus, well, why can't I be basically in the picture, or why am I not as important to be in the picture?
Correct.
um and I'm like, this is a yes and situation, not either or.
Right.
you
And
know
that's exactly what I felt like she framed it as an either or, and therefore missed the point that I think she was trying to get to.
yeah. um
Yes, and this I completely understand as a mixed person myself. I completely understand that, and I was hoping that she would get a little bit deeper into that, but I
yeah,
feel like there was a missed opportunity there because I don't think she ever really went into that.
yeah, I would agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. So again, like you said, if she had framed it as yes and this is exploitative because it's not actually representative of what it's like in this program, yeah, you have a point. Absolutely. And I feel like she started to go there, but then she made it about like, well, what about me? And I was
Yeah,
like, this is feeling like a little bit of a privilege that you're not aware of that you're showing.
yeah,
Um, and that's not the conversation that I think you wanted to have,
yeah,
but it's where you brought us.
yeah.
Yeah. So, that. Let me look at my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. Do. No, but you're spot on, Katie.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything else you want to talk about while I look at my notes?
Now, I don't know, but Katie did have a comment
Oh,
that we didn't point out,
did
which
I
is my
miss it?
parents definitely did not care whether or not I wanted to take family photos, which I think that can be its own dilemma. That's like three
Where?
comments up. Katie, yeah.
My parent. Oh, this one. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, to me that only adds to my point. like family pictures can be, wholesome and consented to, and you just trying to capture the happiness of your family. But what we actually need awareness of is that like your children can consent and can not consent to these images. And
Mm-hmm.
what you should be doing is respecting that. If your kid is making it obvious they don't want to be in this picture,
Mm-hmm.
you should be respecting that because they have their own autonomy. And like I can understand a parent as a parent being frustrated when your kid doesn't want to be in pictures, because you are trying to memorialize basically your family, make sure that there basically is some evidence that these events, these activities, these things you did as a family happened.
Mm-hmm.
um but we should be giving children more respect. you know um so again, I'm a yes and person
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to this. Yes and um so
Yep. Oh, the only other thing that's on my mind, but I'm struggling. Listen, it makes me want to. I get nauseous. These the lice. Ugh.
I know that whole section was something else. It really was something
I
else.
mean, listen, I would say of again, this is a positive because she very well illustrated a serious problem in communities that are dealing with this poverty and don't have access to proper health care, is that her family was plagued with the lice
For years,
for
for
years.
literal years. And she talked about how she was only able to get rid of them once she was living on her own, and therefore could determine the frequency of washing the linens, the everything, because to get rid of lice you need a meticulous system.
Mhm.
And if you don't got the funds to support that system, then you're gonna have lice. So yeah.
They didn't even have money to take a proper shower
Yeah.
or fix their bathroom. So they did not have money to be able to deal with the amount of cleaning supplies and laundry it would take to deal with this issue properly. So what did she say? It was like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it was like 6 years.
Oh, I'm gonna get it itchy.
Yeah.
So I would say, as much as that chapter grossed me out, it's a positive because she did a great job of explaining what that must actually be like.
The way you're wrapping yourself.
I can't help it. Listen, I have a phobia. Okay.
Oh man. But that does make me think about, which I brought up with Steph in private, that like I have a fascination with this kind of thing because as a kid I got lice. I had pretty bad case of it, but I am a curious being at heart. So literally last year, my friend came to visit. We went to one of the science museums in Chicago, and they had an exhibit on bloodsuckers, which included mosquitoes, lice, other creatures that do that. And I found it fascinating. Did I get itchy? Of course.
No.
But I did find it interesting as someone who, girl, the blood sucking insects love me. I wish they didn't, but it is what it is. So I'm just like, I must accept the reality. It just is what it is. So it was an interesting chapter, even though literally it gave me the itch.
Yes, poor me. My phobia. This is not a phobia that I can get rid of. I tried.
The way you're looking right now, it's
No, no, no.
Katie, correct.
No.
Correct. So at this point, it's just, it would be an upward battle. I surrender. I
Listen, I
surrender.
don't care. I'll fight my way up that hill. I don't care if I'm Sisyphus and I just keep rolling the boulder. I'm gonna roll to the day I die. No. I scream bloody murder and I go and swing it. No. Okay, I think that's all I have to really say about it. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Yay! I think that was a great review. Okay, so once again, if you'd like to join us for next month, we are reading To Save and to Destroy by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and you can check us out on Discord down below, socials, whatever. And then we're gonna go do reading sprints now. Yay! Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.